Hey everybody, and welcome back to Newegg TV. My name is Paul and I am very excited to be bringing this video to you guys today for a variety of reasons actually. First off, in case you were wondering or hadn't read the title already, this video is about the AMD Radeon HD 7990. Specifically, we're going to be taking a closer look at Sapphire's rendition of the 7990 right here. So I'll be starting off with a quick overview of the card as well as a quick unboxing of this specific card. But I have another one right here. It's actually still warm because I've been running some benchmarks with it. Yeah, still nice and warm. And so that means that this video is also going to be our first ever Quadfire video, which is just a fun word to say, Quadfire, which is two dual GPU AMD cards in crossfire. Quad. Anyway, apart from that though, more exciting things about this video. First off, or I should say continuing my list, the 7990 recently received a price drop, so go ahead and click the link down in the description if you want to check out current pricing for this card, because it's become a quite attractive prospect for you guys out there, especially considering that this is still the fastest single video card currently on the market. And then finally, we have another sort of evolution of benchmarking, and I'm going to be exploring that a little bit today. What it originated as is what's called FCAT, or FCAT, Frame Capture Analysis Testing, and if you guys aren't familiar with that, I'll post another link down in this video's description to the PC Perspective article from when they were first addressing this particular issue. Now I'm going to get more into that as we move towards the benchmarking section of this video, but to get things started, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the Sapphire Radeon HD 7990. So taking a closer look at the retail box, if you aren't familiar with the 7990, it is a dual GPU card. That means it features two GPUs, or graphics processing units, in the same card. Both GPUs are based on the same, or essentially the same GPU that's in the AMD Radeon HD 7970 GHz edition. That's AMD's flagship single GPU graphics card. So it's based on the 28nm manufacturing process. Codename is Tahiti XT, and the GPUs in this particular 7990, or the 7990 reference design from AMD, are going to run at 950 base clock and 1000 megahertz boost clock. So two 1000 megahertz GPUs in the same card. Apart from that, you get a 6 gig frame buffer, essentially 3 gigs per GPU. You also get this AMD's Never Settle Reloaded feature, which is currently still going on, at least as of the making of this video. I can't promise that it will be there indefinitely, but right now if you buy this card you get 8 free games. So on top of the price drop, again, makes it a really excellent value proposition. Apart from that, down here you get support for some stuff like AMD's app acceleration technology, AMD Crossfire, which we will be making use of today, AMD's HD 3D if you're interested in 3D gaming, and then flipping around to the back, there's some more information here from Sapphire, some info about the 28nm GCN architecture. The 6 gig of memory, 6 gigs of GDDR5 is on a 384-bit bus, so you get separate channels available for each of those memories. Eyefinity 2.0 for using multiple displays. Again, Crossfire X, so two of these cards together gives you a Quadfire configuration. This is a PCI Express Gen 3 cards. Don't worry, it's still backwards compatible with Gen 2, but you get a bit of extra bandwidth with Gen 3, and it does improve performance by at least a few points. But don't worry, again, if you're on Gen 2, you can still purchase this card and you'll still get almost the maximum performance that's available. Again, AMD Apps Acceleration, some more information on that right there. DirectX 11 support, you get HDMI and HD 3D technology again right there. So let's go ahead and take a look inside the box. I'm just going to go ahead and roll right through this since we have lots of information to cover today. But inside the box, we have, of course, the video card itself right there, and I'll give a closer look at that in just a second. And then we also have a little box of accessories. All right, so what do we have in here? Ooh, this has a code. This has a code on it. I better protect that. Sapphire product registration right there with a special code on it, and I'm not sure what the special code gives you, but I'm sure it's something nice. You do get a Crossfire bridge in here. Looks like that. Got the Crossfire logo on it. One of the flexible bridges, so it helps you go with the various spacing that you might have available on your motherboard. A quick install guide from Sapphire. Some Sapphire tech information for contacting them in various countries. Here is the Never Settle Reloaded. There's a sequence number on the back, which again I'm going to try not to show you. But this one's giving you Crysis 3, Deus Ex Human Revolution, Hitman Absolution, Bioshock Infinite, Tomb Raider, Sleeping Dogs, Far Cry 3, and Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon. A quite impressive selection of AAA titles right there. Instructions are on the back there for how to log in and redeem your codes. You also get a couple adapter dongles right here. Actually, a total of 4, which I'll finish on. you get a Sapphire driver, an installation disk. I'm definitely going to recommend, particularly for this card, don't use the drivers on this disk. Go over to the AMD website, download at minimum the 13.8 beta drivers. Those came out just recently, and those feature some of the new technology that I'm going to be demoing in just a moment. You also get a Sapphire case badge right there. The new drivers are specifically geared towards crossfire configurations, and since the 7990 is essentially a crossfire configuration in the same card, it's definitely a benefit to update to the latest drivers. There is your DVI to HDMI adapter, so if you've got an HDMI connection, you can use that. You also have some mini DisplayPort connectors coming out the back of the card. So this one's mini DisplayPort to dual-link DVI. You also have mini DisplayPort to full-size DisplayPort. Very handy adapter to have. And then also mini DisplayPort to, again, dual-link DVI. So a couple of those, it looks like. Actually, it seems like you get one active. Yeah, one active and one passive as far as these adapters go. Sorry, I'm messing with Kyle. He's trying to follow me. He's doing a great job. All right, onto the card in here, which also is still warm because I have been benchmarking these, and I reboxed it so I can unbox it for you guys. A quick look at the card itself. You can see Sapphire has given us some Sapphire logos there, as well as the AMD Radeon logo there at the middle. You get a 3-fan cooling design, massive aluminum radiators under here with heat pipes going from each GPU, and each GPU, as you can see from the 2 brackets right there, helps to push the heat away from the GPU, disperse it onto those fins, and the fans are going to blow air down over it to help disperse the heat that generates. Here you'll also notice a bit of copper heat pipe, or a copper heat sink right there. That's specifically over the power delivery for the GPU, for both GPUs, again, to help keep those components nice and cool. For power requirements, you got 2 8-pin PCI Express power connectors right there, and you definitely want to make sure you have a beefy power supply, particularly if you're going to be going with 2 of these. My power draw under load was peaking at about a 1050-ish or thereabouts. That's 1050 watts, by the way. Here at the back you can see your video outs, so you got 4 mini display ports and 1 dual-link DVI connection point right there. And that pretty much rounds it out for the card. You also have, of course, the PCI Express Gen 3 connector there at the bottom, physically the same as PCI Express Gen 1 or Gen 2. And you do get a nice plain black back plate here as well, which helps protect some of the components on the back, and also gives it a very nice look when it's actually installed in your case, and of course matches with the black and red design, as is the sort of the theme colors of AMD, particularly the AMD Radeon series. Oh, one other thing I did want to point out, which is located right here, and I did make use of this function during my testing. You actually have a dual BIOS, or two vBIOSes, not sure what the plural of BIOS is, but you get 2 of them on this card. You got a little switch, you can switch back and forth between those. So what I actually did was I took the vBIOS on this card because it was a more recent version. I copied it using GPU-Z, and I was able to use the ATI flash utility to copy that BIOS over to the reference 7990 right here, which we got directly from AMD, and that helped the cards to play nice with each other a little bit better. But that said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about FCAT and the new benchmarking procedures. Now, if you're into computers, benchmarks, and PC gaming in general, you've probably looked at some benchmarks before, and you've probably seen the typical frames per second, or FPS rating, which has been for a very long time the established method for determining a video card's performance. You take the number of frames it was able to output in a certain number of time, that will give you frames per second, and basically a more powerful GPU or more powerful graphics card is going to be able to give you more frames per second than, say, a less powerful graphics card. However, there is another element to that equation, and it comes down to user experience. There has for quite a while now been a little glitch that gamers are fond of calling a micro stutter. Basically, as you're playing a game, you might have nice, smooth gameplay, and then there's a little hop, there's a little snag. There's a frame that stays on the screen for a little bit longer. And while a lot of people will say that they never even notice micro stutter occurring, a lot of folks, especially if you play lots of different games, lots of different systems, especially if you're going to do testing, you will notice it eventually. You'll be playing a game, you'll see a little stutter, and a lot of times it's negligible, you can ignore it, and it really doesn't affect your gameplay that much. But particularly if you're playing, say, an FPS game like a first-person shooter, something where you need to have that millisecond response time, anything like that that sort of takes you out of the flow of the game, is going to affect your experience and essentially going to lead to a more negative experience. So the search for microstutter has been going on for quite some time now, and it's been something that the folks in the industry have been attempting to quantify in some way, to be able to say, here's a card that does well and does not microstutter, and here's a card that might suffer more from it. As of, I think about April was when the article was first published. PC Perspective, and I want to say a shout out to Ryan Shrout, or a Shroud out, right? Trademark, right now, because he put together an article. A lot of guys on his team worked on it as well, and they basically were able to boil this down and quantify it. Now, originally they were working with NVIDIA, and NVIDIA, through a lot of testing and whatnot, has actually been working on this particular problem for quite some time as well. Now, what they found was that NVIDIA card solutions, particularly multi-card solutions, which NVIDIA calls SLI versus AMD's Crossfire, they found actually perform quite well. There was not much microstutter, and what is called frame time, or the amount of time it takes for a frame to be displayed on the screen, was really not affected that much. So NVIDIA cards were performing quite well. AMD cards, on the other hand, while single card configurations also perform quite well, they found that Crossfire configurations, so 2 or more GPUs with AMD configurations, were particularly susceptible to microstutter, and through the FCAT testing, or frame capture testing, that Ryan Shrout and the guys at PC Perspective did, they were actually able to develop a way to quantify this amount so that they could sort of give an apples-to-apples comparison of one card versus another, or one configuration versus another, to show you, here's a card that performs well, here's a card that does not perform well. Fast forward about 4 months, and AMD has been diligently working on updating their drivers specifically to address this issue. It comes down to smoothness in gameplay, and basically keeping you in an immersive experience so that you have the chance to enjoy your gameplay without sort of being taken out of the experience by noticing a frame that took too long. Or particularly if you're trying to get a headshot in and you have that happen, well, then you die and your opponent doesn't die, and then your kill-death ratio goes crap, and then, yeah, anyway. So what I've done is I've used this Crossfire bridge to combine both of these cards together, which wasn't even really necessary, but since I did have the option for Quadfire, I wanted to start it up. But I also wanted to see what kind of performance difference there was since the new 12.8 drivers came out. So what I'm going to be showing you guys in just a moment here is a comparison of a single 7990 as well as two 7990s. So you got the 2-way and the 4-way GPU configurations. And then I'm also going to be showing you the earlier 13.6 drivers as well as the brand new 13.8 beta drivers to hopefully give you guys a little bit better idea of what FCAT actually is, what it means to you when you're actually playing a game, and also what kind of benefits and improvements that AMD has come out with the new beta drivers. And I do want to point out, and I'm going to point out again, these are beta drivers. They're still being worked on. And while we are going to see some improvements, I will also give you some caveats to keep in mind if you're considering purchasing one of these cards yourselves, or if you're considering going into the Crossfire, making the jump to Crossfire as well. So I said I'm going to talk about benchmarks, but a quick look at the test bed, of course, because we really like our test bed. Of course, we have the Inwin D-frame case right here, which I know it doesn't match with the red, but whatever. It's an excellent test bed. Hercules 1600 watt power supply from Rosewell. Of course, I got both of the graphics cards, which I moved over here and set up back in the quad Crossfire configuration, so the two 7990s right there. Motherboard is the Asus Rampage 4 Formula. We've got 16 gigs of G-Skill Trident X 2400 speed memory. The CPU, which is under here, is the 3970X from Intel. It's overclocked to 4.5 gigahertz. It's being cooled by the Cooler Master Sidon 120XL, which is the thicker 120 millimeter version of their closed loop CPU cooler. And oh yeah, and then we also have a SanDisk Ultra, I believe it's Ultra Plus SSD, which you can't really see. It's kind of tucked down there at the bottom, but 256 gig version of that. And that's pretty much the test bed that we're working with. So coming back to the FCAT, or frame capture analysis testing, what that does, if you have the proper configuration, you would actually set up a system like this. You would take your video out from your graphics card, connect it to another system, and you would use that to actually capture the rendered frames. And what that does is it actually gives you a real output of the video that you're looking at, and then you can analyze those rendered frames as they come out, and you can get a really accurate perspective on what you're actually seeing on screen. And that's the FCAT method that they've been using over at PC Perspective, and it's actually taken off quite a bit. There's lots of folks who are setting up those types of systems. We do not have the FCAT capture system set up right now. So what I'm going to show you guys here is another method that you can use to do a similar type of test. It's not going to be quite as accurate as the real FCAT testing, but it will give you a good idea of the difference, particularly if you're going to be testing, say, a Crossfire configuration against a non-Crossfire configuration. The elements of the actual rendering of each frame that's coming into play here is going to be the variance, and let me pull up our first slide here, which is Unigine Valley 1.0. The upper chart here is using the 13.6 drivers. The lower chart here is using the newer 13.8 beta drivers. Now, you might notice when you're looking at these charts, first off, a few different things. One is the 33.3 millisecond line, which is right there. Second is the 16.7 millisecond line right there. If a frame is being rendered within those periods of times, 33.3 milliseconds is essentially going to give you about 60 frames per second. 16.7 milliseconds is going to give you about 60 frames per second. And those are kind of the two frame rate points that gamers often look for in order to match up with a 60 hertz monitor, for example. Now, at this point, I should also give a big shout out to Maximum PC. They're one of my favorite websites and magazines for PC information, and that's where I came upon this Frafs bench viewer, which is the software that I'm using to view our Frafs output. So you load up a game, you load up Frafs, you do a run, preferably a run that you can do repeatedly in order to get accurate tests. You take the frame times file output, drag it over into here, and you can get a visual layout of that. So again, on the top here we have the old driver, bottom is the new driver, and that will continue for all these slides. Now, when we're looking at the variance in the frames that are outputted, what we're looking at here is specifically the time it takes for each frame to be rendered. 16.7 milliseconds, again, will give you about 60 frames per second. 33.3 milliseconds will give you about 30 frames per second. And on the upper chart here, you'll notice a pretty big variance in all the frames that are rendered. Each little point on the line here is the point at which a frame is rendered. You can see some outliers further up, and those are ones that for one reason or another took longer to render. That's another element that AMD is attempting to limit or reduce or eliminate if possible with the latest driver updates. But going from the upper chart here to the lower, what you'll notice that the variance here gets much, much smaller. And that's sort of a visual representation that as you're playing this game, you're not going to see a frame rendered very quickly and then a frame rendered very slowly, because that is what leads to that hiccup or that micro-stuttering effect, which is what they're essentially trying to eliminate. So again, this is Unigine Valley 1.0 at 1080. I also have that same test run at 1600. So again, here at 1600, 2560 by 1600, I should say. Again, you'll notice with the older drivers, you see a lot more variance here between the points on the graph. Down here, you'll see they've tightened up a lot. They've come together, and regardless of what frame rate you're getting, the frames that you're seeing are going to be rendered at a frame time that's much more in parallel with the frame before it or the frame after it, and that's what gives you smooth gameplay. So you can see here how AMD has really done a great job to update these drivers for additional tests. Now I'm going to run through quite a few here. I showed you Valley, so here's Unigine Heaven 4.0, which I find to be a little bit more stressful than Valley when it comes to actual frame rate. Again, here we can see a huge improvement. Here you've got frames that are rendering as quickly as 10 or 20 milliseconds down here, or up here, even worse, you're getting past the 30 or 33 millisecond mark. Upwards and above 40 is what you really don't want to see. So again, down here in the bottom, you're always going to have those outliers that come into play. That's just something that happens as a game is, or a scene is being rendered by a 3D engine. But again, down here you can see how the chart has really tightened up. And again, that's just going to lead to more fluid gameplay. Next up, Heaven 4.0 at 2560 by 1600. That last slide was 1080. Again, very wide margin right here. Much tighter numbers down there at the bottom. Next up is Battlefield 3, so this was an actual real world game. This again is at 1080, so again, right there on the top and on the bottom, you can see all the points on the chart. They've really compressed down, and they've really hit right about where that average line is, which is that dashed line right there. Here's Battlefield 3 at 2560 by 1600. Same result here. Much tighter chart down there on the bottom. And next up we have Bioshock Infinite. I only ran 5 benchmarks for this, guys, so don't worry. But I did also run them in Quadfire, which we haven't gotten to yet. Bioshock Infinite looks like it was already pretty tightly programmed, at least as far as the interaction with the drivers go. Here on the top with the older drivers, you can see some variance in these wider parts right here. They are tightened up a bit, so you can see some more difference there. But again, these are beta drivers, so we're going to see improvement over time. And I believe or at least the impression I've gotten at this point, is that they've been really focusing on the dual GPU configuration. So you're going to see better results here with, say, a single 7990 than with the Quadfire. Here again, this is Bioshock Infinite at 2560 by 1600. You can see a wider variance on the top, narrower variance on the bottom. Next up is Crysis 3. This was a game that I didn't see quite as much of a difference on, but you can still visually, you can check it out there. So you can see the number, you can see the frames bouncing back and forth here between quick and slow, and then on the bottom you see them grouped up again much more tightly. That's going to result in smoother gameplay. Here's Crysis 3 at 2560 by 1600. Again, wider on the top, narrower on the bottom. Okay, so that's all the slides for single 7990, so just a Sapphire 7990. But I also ran it with both 7990s and Quadfire. Again, we're back to Unigine Valley 1.0 running at 1080. And here's where I got the impression that 4 GPU configurations, which are much more rare, are probably something that AMD is going to be addressing in future driver updates. I also want to point out DirectX 11 titles, 10 and 11 are currently supported, and they're going to be picking up with DirectX 9 as well as Eyefinity support with later updates of the Catalyst drivers. But here's Unigine Valley at 1080. Again, not a huge difference there from the top to the bottom. This is Unigine Valley at 1600 or 2560 by 1600. Again, you can see them, they are grouped a little bit more on the bottom, but again, not as huge a difference here. Also, when you're dealing with the original test run in Quadfire, well, that's a lot of GPU horsepower as it is, so you're already starting at a pretty high frame rate there. This is Unigine Heaven 4.0 at 1080. Again, actually here's where I saw a bit more substantial difference going from the top to the bottom and the old driver to the new driver. Again, this is with 4 GPUs. Here's Heaven 4.0 at 1600. Here we saw a pretty big difference here. We can see the graph really tightened up there on the bottom with many fewer outliers than we saw in the upper graph. Here's Battlefield 3. And Battlefield 3 is actually kind of interesting with this GPU configuration, especially at 1080, because Battlefield 3 has a 200 frames per second cap, and even with a single 7990, we get pretty close to that. So the actual frame per second average for this is 199 for both, and that's why I think both charts are looking very similar there. At 1600, you get a bit more variance, as you can probably see right there. And I think here, if you look here on the top at you'll see some of these numbers bumping up towards the 16.7 millisecond, whereas down on the bottom they stay definitely a lot closer to that average frame rate, which was 184 frames per second, which is pretty overkill anyway. But that's Battlefield 3. We also have Bioshock Infinite once again. And here, if there wasn't much variance in the original slides of this with the single 7990, we're seeing probably even a little bit less right here. But there's those two slides side by side. Here's Bioshock Infinite at 2560 by 1600. When you go to the higher frame rate, you do get it gives the graphics cards a little bit more to chew on. So I think around in this area, you see, again, a little bit more tightening up, but you're going to see less of it, I think, as a result of having more graphics horsepower to begin with, as well as the fact that I really doubt that AMD at this point has invested a ton of time in the 4-way GPU solution, but I'm sure that's still to come. Here's Crysis 3 at 1080, and here we saw a bit of a difference. Again, you'll see all the frames a little bit wider there and a bit more tighter on the bottom. And here's Crysis 3 at 2560 by 1600, and I believe this is our last, yes, this is our last slide. So again, here you can see we're averaging about 93 frames per second at 2560 by 1600. Here we're still averaging 93 frames per second, but again, this is another one of the tests that I didn't see quite as much difference on, but when you look close, you can see a little bit again, more tightening up of the frame time when you go from the older driver to the newer driver. And that is going to wrap it up for this video, guys. Once again, we've been taking a closer look at the AMD Radeon HD 7990 by Sapphire right here in a single card 2 GPU configuration, as well as a 2 card 4 GPU configuration. And hopefully you guys have learned a little bit more about the FCAT methodology, as well as a way that you guys can try it out a little bit at home without necessarily the investment that it takes to get an actual FCAT capture computer that you can use to do the really serious in-depth testing and analysis of these cards. But I'm Paul with Newegg TV. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, don't forget to hit that like button. It's right down there in the lower left-hand corner. And don't forget to subscribe to Newegg TV for additional videos just like this one. And we'll see you all in the next video.